The moment my wife, Amy, looked me straight in the eye at our own dinner party and said, "Are you a wimp? Man up already." I felt a sense of humiliation so powerful, it nearly froze me in place. It wasn't just the words, or even the mocking tone. It was the fact that she said it right there in front of our friends, people we'd known for years. In that split second, I realized the woman I thought I knew was slipping away from me faster than I could comprehend. But before I dive into the heart of the chaos that unraveled my life, take a second to hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to follow along as I reveal how this seemingly perfect marriage came crashing down, and the shocking discoveries I made along the way. I'm Marcus, by the way, and I live in a quiet suburb just outside of Boston. I've always been a simple guy with simple pleasures. I love football Sundays, grilling with my buddies, and working on DIY projects around the house. Amy and I met in our late 20s through mutual friends. She was vivacious, spirited, and always had a smile that lit up the room. Back then, I thought I was the luckiest guy in the world. We fell into an easy rhythm of late-night phone calls, spontaneous road trips, and weekends lost in each other's company. Everyone called us the perfect couple, and for a long time, that's how we felt. Yet somewhere between the honeymoon phase and that fateful dinner party, something changed. It started small, almost imperceptible at first. Little criticisms here and there, playful jabs that stung more than they should have. Amy would roll her eyes at my jokes, make snide comments about my weight or my predictable taste in music. I brushed it off, chalking it up to normal marital bickering. After all, I'd grown up hearing that marriage wasn't always sunshine and roses. But the night she called me a wimp in front of everyone felt different. It was our usual Friday get-together. A couple of friends, some good food, and enough wine to keep the evening loose and fun. I was telling a story about my recent mishap with a leaky faucet. Something mundane yet slightly embarrassing. Out of nowhere, Amy cut me off and delivered that line. "Are you a wimp? Man up already." The entire room went dead silent. My buddy David, who'd known me since high school, stared into his beer like he wished he could disappear. His wife, Nicole, shot Amy a look of disbelief. I tried to laugh it off, but my throat felt tight. My cheeks burned hot. No one quite knew what to say next, so the conversation sputtered into a forced new topic about sports scores and weekend plans. But there was no real recovery from that moment. I excused myself and stepped out to the back patio under the guise of checking on the grill. My mind churned. How had we gotten here? Wasn't Amy supposed to have my back, especially around friends? When the evening ended, I confronted her gently, waiting until everyone had left to avoid public drama. I said something like, "Hey, you really blindsided me back there. Are you okay?" She shrugged, feigning innocence. "Don't be so sensitive, Marcus. It was just a joke. Everyone needs to toughen up sometimes." She said it in that dismissive tone that let me know there'd be no real apology or discussion, not tonight. And as usual, I let it go, for the moment anyway, because I dreaded a shouting match. I told myself we'd talk it over another time. Little did I know our problems ran deeper than just a few snippy comments. Over the following weeks, Amy's behavior got stranger. She spent more time on her phone, turned it away from me whenever I walked into a room, and made vague excuses about having to stay late at work or meet up with a friend from out of town. Her job as an interior designer sometimes required odd hours, but this felt different. The woman who used to text me memes throughout the day and call me just to say hi was suddenly as distant as a stranger. I tried to keep myself busy, focusing on house projects to stop my mind from wandering. I built new shelves in the garage, repainted the living room, and started working overtime at my job at a software startup. The more I worked, the more I realized that staying busy only numbed the pain temporarily. Late at night, I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder who Amy was texting. Was it just girlfriends? A new client? Why did I feel such an uneasy pit in my stomach? The next incident that really shook me happened one Saturday afternoon. We were supposed to go house hunting for a bigger place. Amy had decided months ago that we needed more space, though I was comfortable in our modest home. That morning, she got a phone call, mumbled something about an emergency with a client, and told me to go view the open houses alone. I felt a pang of disappointment. House hunting had been her idea after all, and now she was bailing last minute? "Are you sure?" I asked, scanning her face for clues. She nodded quickly, didn't meet my eyes, and then practically ran out the door. She looked almost relieved to leave. I went to see the properties anyway, but the entire time I felt a heaviness in my chest. An open house is supposed to be an exciting step for a couple. Discussing future plans, picking out which rooms could be a nursery if you want kids, or how the backyard might be perfect for summer barbecues. Doing it alone felt hollow, like I was rewriting a script that was supposed to star both of us. My phone buzzed a few times, but never with a text from Amy. Back at home that evening, she wasn't around. Her text said, "Staying out longer than expected. See you later." With no explanation. I had a sinking feeling. As I paced the living room, I glanced at a photo of us from 5 years ago taken in Times Square during a weekend trip. We looked ecstatic, arms around each other, big smiles. I wondered if that was just a younger version of us who didn't know how quickly things could fall apart. A few weeks passed without major incident, but tension lingered. I finally decided to confide in my friend David, the same guy who'd been at our house the night Amy called me a wimp. We met for beers at a local sports bar, and after some small talk, I laid it all out for him. Amy's sudden distance, the weird excuses, the constant phone checking. David's expression darkened. "Dude," he said, "I hate to say it, but it sounds like she might be cheating." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to brush him off, tell him he was crazy. But deep down, a part of me had already considered that possibility. I just didn't want to believe it. Amy and I had built a life together. Could she really be stepping out on me? David suggested I keep my eyes open, maybe look into phone records or pay attention to odd credit card charges. I felt uneasy about spying on her, but my trust was shaken. That night I didn't sleep much. I debated with myself. Was it worth violating her privacy if it meant discovering the truth? I rationalized that I had a right to know if my wife was lying to me. 2 days later, Amy was off to visit her sister upstate. Something about the way she hurried out the door with a too cheerful smile made my stomach churn. The second she left, I opened our laptop, a shared device we sometimes both used for bills, and checked her email. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure the neighbors could hear it. I wasn't quite sure what I was looking for, or if I'd even find anything, but I had to try. Sure enough, there it was in the sent folder, an email chain with a subject line, "Weekend plans, let's make it happen." My eyes scanned the contents. It was sent to a Ryan J. I didn't recognize the name, but the content was clear enough. They were planning a weekend away at some cozy lodge near a lake. My blood ran cold as I noticed the dates matched exactly the sisters' weekend she'd told me about. The email was full of flirty banter, references to past meetups, and inside jokes that made my chest tighten. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands shaking. I wanted to scream, cry, punch a wall, anything to release the rage and betrayal building inside of me. But mostly, I wanted answers. Who was Ryan? How long had this been going on? Why had she turned so mean, so callous, that she'd humiliate me in front of our friends while lying about her own secret life? When Amy returned from her so-called trip, I was ready for confrontation. But something held me back. The small shred of hope that maybe I was misunderstanding, that there was some other explanation. As soon as she walked in, though, I noticed a new glow about her, like someone who'd just had a romantic getaway. She barely even greeted me, just dropped her bag and said she was exhausted. I watched her glide past me as if I were a piece of furniture. I spent the next week in a haze, trying to act normal while planning my next move. Should I hire a private investigator? Should I confront Ryan himself? A part of me felt desperate to cling to the marriage, to the life we'd built. But each day her cruelty toward me grew. Small jabs, eye rolls, dismissive laughter when I mentioned anything I cared about. It was like she wanted me to feel inferior, to confirm the idea that I was just some wimp who wouldn't stand up for himself. Finally, the breaking point arrived one evening when we had another group of friends over. We were celebrating a co-worker's promotion, hosting a casual backyard barbecue. I was doing my usual routine, flipping burgers, offering people drinks, trying to be the gracious host. Amy, however, was in rare form, criticizing everything from the music playlist to the way I'd arranged the patio furniture. At one point, she snatched the spatula from my hand and said loudly, "Geez, Marcus, can't you do anything right? It's like you don't even know how to grill a simple burger." A couple of our friends exchanged awkward glances. My face felt hot, but I tried to keep calm, responding lightly that I had it under control. She rolled her eyes. "Yeah, sure," she snapped. "Mr. Big Tough Guy over here. Right." Inside, my anger was boiling, but I kept a lid on it until the guests left. As soon as the last person walked out, I turned to Amy. "We need to talk," I said, my voice trembling. She looked at me with that same dismissive smirk. "What, you're gonna whine about me being rude again?" I took a deep breath, my mind racing with what I'd found in her email. The words felt heavy in my mouth, but they had to come out. "Who's Ryan?" I asked, forcing myself to meet her gaze. For a split second, I saw panic flicker in her eyes. Then her expression hardened. "That's none of your business," she replied, her voice low and venomous. My heart pounded. "It is my business if you're spending weekends with him and lying to me about it." She exhaled sharply, crossing her arms. "Don't act like a victim, Marcus. You've been distant for months. It's not my fault you've turned into a boring shell of a man." The words hit me like a punch. "Boring shell?" She continued. "I needed excitement, okay? I'm not going to apologize for wanting a life that isn't mundane." Tears stung at the back of my eyes, but I refused to let them spill. "So that justifies humiliating me? Calling me a wimp in front of our friends? Sneaking off for romantic weekends with someone else?" She shrugged, her face unreadable. "I don't care what you think anymore. If you had been a real man, maybe I wouldn't have gone looking for something more." Those words, "a real man," cut deeper than I cared to admit. The memory of her telling me to man up in front of everyone came flooding back. This time, however, I felt something shift in me. A well of anger, hurt, and heartbreak that I couldn't bottle up any longer. I told her quietly but firmly, "You've been cheating on me and you've been tearing me down for your own guilt. That's not on me, Amy. It's on you." My voice shook with emotion, but I pressed on. "I don't know who you've become, but you're not the woman I married. And if I'm not a real man in your eyes, so be it. I'm done trying to prove myself to someone who doesn't even respect me." Amy's nostrils flared. For a moment I thought she might lash out physically, but she just turned away, refusing to look at me. Her silence, coupled with her dismissive posture, spoke volumes. In that moment, I knew I was watching our marriage die. I slept on the couch that night, staring at the dark ceiling, recounting every sign I'd ignored, every red flag I'd brushed aside. The next morning I began looking at apartments. I called David and explained the situation. He offered me a place to crash, at least temporarily, while I figured things out. I felt both relieved and terrified. My life was about to change in ways I never imagined. A day later, I confronted Amy again. "I'm leaving," I said, heart pounding. She looked up from her phone, her expression a mix of annoyance and mild shock. "Where are you going to go?" she asked, sounding almost bored. I told her I'd stay with David until I found my own place. She shrugged, as if dismissing me like a co-worker who'd just quit a job. "Fine, do whatever you want." It stung. I suppose a part of me had hoped she'd show some remorse or at least sadness. Instead, she was as cold as ever. With a heavy heart, I packed a suitcase full of essentials. A few changes of clothes, my laptop, important documents. I left the wedding photos, the vacation albums, and all the sentimental trinkets behind. It was too painful to look at them. Maybe one day I'd gather the courage to sort through the memories, but not then. I walked out the door, not knowing if I'd ever step foot in that house again. My hands trembled as I loaded the suitcase into my car. Tears threatened to spill over, but I forced myself to hold them back. I kept thinking I deserved better than this. I had tried to be a good husband, had tried to keep the spark alive, had tried to see the best in Amy despite her hurtful words. Yet she had trampled on my trust and humiliated me every chance she got. The drive to David's place felt strangely calm. No blaring music, no frantic phone calls, just the hum of the car engine. Once parked, I sat there for a few minutes, letting the reality sink in. I had just walked away from my marriage, from the life I'd built for years. And for what? To preserve the last shred of dignity I had left. A small part of me felt guilty. wondering if I'd truly done all I could to save our relationship. But a louder voice in my head reminded me that respect was a two-way street, and Amy had turned it into a dead end. Over the next several weeks, I moved through life in a surreal blur. I'd wake up on David's pull-out couch, get ready for work, and struggle to pretend everything was normal. Co-workers would ask me how I was doing, and I'd mumble something vague like, "I'm hanging in there." Meanwhile, the rumor mill was quietly churning among our circle of friends. Word got out that I'd left Amy, and I started getting texts and calls from people who were worried or just plain curious. Some asked if there was infidelity involved, but I kept things close to the vest. I wasn't ready to spill all the details. Amy tried calling me a handful of times, mostly to demand that I come pick up the rest of my stuff or sign some paperwork regarding the house. I kept the conversation short. The last thing I needed was to get sucked into an emotional vortex by a woman who'd made it clear she had no respect for me. A month later, I found a small studio apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't anything fancy, just a one-room setup with a kitchenette and a narrow bathroom. But it was mine. For the first time in what felt like forever, I had a space free from her critical eye. I bought a couple of second-hand pieces of furniture, hung up some generic art prints, and tried to create a homey environment. On my first night there, I turned on the local news, cracked open a beer, and realized I could breathe. No snide remarks, no anxious knots in my stomach. Sure, I felt lonely, but I also felt a strange sense of liberation. Eventually, the anger and sadness gave way to a cautious sense of hope. I threw myself into new hobbies. Took up running to clear my mind, started cooking more elaborate meals for myself, and even reconnected with old college friends. David introduced me to a local group that organized hikes and outdoor adventures. I went on a few trips with them, rediscovering the thrill of nature. Being on a mountain trail or kayaking down a river reminded me there was a whole world outside of my marital drama. As for Amy, I heard bits and pieces through the grapevine. Some people said she was still seeing Ryan, others claimed she'd cut him off. Truthfully, I didn't care. Our divorce proceedings were straightforward. No kids, and she kept the house while I asked for nothing more than my personal belongings. She didn't contest it, likely believing I'd come crawling back at some point, but I never did. It wasn't easy. There were nights I'd scroll through old photos on my phone, remembering better times. I'd question if I had handled things right, if I'd been too quick to walk away. But then I'd recall the disdain in her voice, the humiliation on her face when she called me a wimp, and the lies she told so effortlessly about her cheating. Any lingering doubt was replaced by the realization that sometimes leaving is the only way to save yourself. My turning point came one afternoon when I ran into Nicole, one of Amy's old friends, at the grocery store. She pulled me aside and quietly said, "I never thought Amy would treat you like that. I'm sorry for everything you went through." Her eyes were kind, and I noticed genuine regret in them. "She changed," Nicole continued. "Everyone saw it, but we didn't know how to step in." Hearing that from someone else validated my decision. I wasn't crazy or weak for walking away. I was simply protecting my own sense of self-worth. I thanked Nicole for her concern and told her I was doing better. And it was true. I was doing better, even if my life was still in the process of being rebuilt. Now, a year has passed since I left Amy. The divorce is finalized, and I'm still in that little studio apartment, but it feels more like home than the house I once shared with her ever did by the end. I've discovered strength in myself that I never knew existed. Strength to stand up for my own happiness, to walk away from a toxic situation and to build a fresh start even when it's terrifying. Looking back, I realized that the night she called me a wimp was both the cruelest and most necessary wake-up call I could have received. It set off a chain of events that forced me to confront the reality of my failing marriage and her infidelity. Without that moment of public humiliation, I might have stayed in denial, hoping things would magically return to how they used to be. I might still be stuck living under the same roof with someone who belittled me at every turn. By choosing to leave, I reclaimed my dignity and paved the way for a future that, while uncertain, is entirely my own. And for anyone out there who's struggling with a similar situation, remember this. It's never weak to walk away from something that's breaking you down. Sometimes, manning up means having the courage to protect your own heart and soul. So that's my story. How a cutting insult from my wife in front of our friends led to the unraveling of our marriage, revealed her hidden cheating, and ultimately showed me the path to freedom. If you're wrestling with whether to stay or go in a broken relationship, I hope my experience reminds you that respect and honesty should never be negotiable. You deserve better. And hey, if you've stuck with me through this long, heartfelt tale, I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe for more stories and real-life experiences. Life can be messy, but sometimes sharing our messy stories helps someone else find a little clarity and helps us find our own healing along the way.